video is sponsored by Squarespace. My entire life has been guided by a passion for growing food. And unfortunately, over the last few years, I failed to have any sort of veggie garden. And you know, the truth is, it's really affected me. So I'm really excited for this upcoming growing season to really recommit myself to the idea of growing food and having a lot of food. I have a really exciting plan for what I'm going to be doing with my new garden and the things that I'm going to be growing and the things that I want to be doing with that food as well, that I'm super excited to share with you. But I thought it might be interesting to share just how much my life has kind of been built around the idea of growing food, because it's kind of a little bit of a funny circumstance that I'm in the position that I'm in now, you know, kind of having this career basically info dumping about how much I'm just really passionate about growing, and it's confusing for me that I got here until sometimes when I look at, you know, what my life has been. Growing up as a child, my mother was really, really passionate about gardening, but her passion specifically was in perennial landscaping gardening. You know, it was the 90s. In the Okanagan here, xeriscaping concepts were, you know, really exciting, kind of really getting developed. As a kid, you know, it wasn't my passion, but you know how it is. You join your parents and you join the things that they do. So I was often out in the garden helping her out, and you know, I had, you know, the plants that we grew, I knew the Latin names for them. I remember helping my mom at her friend's xeriscaping nursery business from time to time, going to the Kelowna Garden Club as a kid, joining her on some of these activities. Growing was something that, you know, I always had around me, but her passion wasn't my passion, because for me, it was always about food. And the unfortunate thing with, as you may know, because I'm assuming most of you are all passionate gardeners too, but there's never enough space. And so when you have one very passionate gardener, you know, they're going to very quickly take over the space. So it left very little space for me to play in, and it also left very little space for my dad, who liked to have a vegetable garden to grow in. So me and my dad together had like a very small little veggie garden space, and I also remembered getting a few spots around the yard where I was able to grow strawberries and things like that, which I always loved. But the great thing about my family is, while my mom was growing, you know, beautiful decorative landscaping, my dad's side of the family was always really involved in foraging. And so growing up, we did a lot of morel mushroom picking. I have lots of memories of, as a child, going out to old forest fire burn sites in the area, doing picking. I remember over the years heading out and doing different like herb and food foraging with my dad. My dad's parents, they always had a really large vegetable garden. They also like lived on a piece of land that had a little bit of forest around it, and we'd go out there and, you know, there'd be little foraging things that they taught me about. You know, one of my favorite kind of memories is once I found out that lamb's ears or amaranth, those types of things, were edible at school. So I got all excited. I made all my friends. I was like, wait, we can eat this, so we have to eat this. And I organized a potluck salad. Someone brought like tomatoes for the salad, someone brought dressing. We brought this big bowl and we went and we picked the weeds off of the school property and ate them for lunch one day in elementary school. It's just, when I find out that there's things you can eat, it drives me. There's something about it in my brain. It's just like I zero in on it and I have to have it. And it's something about me that's been there, you know, ever since I was a really, really young child. When I moved out of my parents' home and got my own place, it was when I moved from Kelowna to Victoria to go to university. And one of the first things that I did after I got a house there is I went and I found a garden for myself. I actually discovered that there was a community garden plot that was about a half an hour from my home, that had had space, it had availability, and so I got one of these community garden spots, and it was just such an incredible resource. They were 1,000 square feet. There's about 100 different plots in this group. And, you know, there's so many people, so much knowledge. It was very challenging for me because growing in the Okanagan versus growing in Victoria is like night and day. So, you know, I went with my first garden to plant the things that I'd grown before with my dad, things like tomatoes and all those hot weather loving things that just don't necessarily thrive on Vancouver Island, where it's, you know, a temperate rainforest. I remember the first time I bought seeds for myself. You know, I went to the local dollar store and got those like 4 for $1 seed packets, and you know, it was really, really exciting to finally have my own garden and my own space. I realized that it being a half an hour from my house was going to make it a little bit of a challenge for me to get to it regularly. I was a full-time student, and I also needed to work. I needed to be making money to be able to support myself as I went through school. And so because the very first thing I did was I got the garden. The job came next. And so there was a plaza that was kind of like halfway between my house and the community garden plot. And I was like, oh, if I get a job at this mall, then it'll encourage me every time I go to work, I'll be able to also like go to my community garden. It'll work really well. And so I ended up getting a job at a shoe store there, being a stock person, just because I literally went with a stack of resumes being like, I want a job near my garden. And it's kind of funny because that first job that, you know, was purely just for the convenience of getting to my garden ended up kind of becoming like my adult career until I had kids. I didn't end up keeping the community garden for the entire time that I lived in Victoria. The space was so large. I mean, 1,000 square feet, you can grow so much food in it. I remember one day going, right, because I had to either bus or ride my bike to get to this garden space. I remember one day going and it was like, okay, today's the day I'm gonna harvest the beans. And I had 2 grocery bags and I filled them to overflowing. You know, I had like 20 pounds of beans, and hauling them home on the bus, like, oh, all these beans, and it wasn't even everything that got picked, and getting them home and being like, there's more beans than I know what to do with, and trying to give them to my friends and everything. The space was just so large that I couldn't keep up with the work of it, and I also couldn't keep up with how much food it produced. So after a couple of years, I eventually had to get rid of it. But one of the amazing things about Victoria was how much foraging was available in the area. There was tons of fruit trees, berry bushes. The areas that me and my friends lived in were all of these 100-year-old houses that had been rental units for 80 years. So every single yard was kind of filled with overgrown 100-year-old herb gardens, and yards that just weren't being taken care of that actually had a lot of food in them. So over the years of living in Victoria, even without that garden, there was a lot of food that I was able to engage in, just that was kind of free and available in the community. I've always loved the Okanagan, and I really enjoyed the years that I spent going to school and living in Victoria. Being on the island, being near the ocean was incredible, but the more time I spent there, the more I realized I really wanted to get back here, back to the Okanagan. This is like where it felt like home. I missed that heat, those summers. There's so many things that I just really love about the Okanagan. And so eventually I made my way back to Kelowna, and the first place that I got here was in a trailer park. I didn't have a lot of money, so I needed to find a really affordable place to live. And as I started looking, yet again, my goal was to be able to have a space to grow. And I realized that for the price that I could afford, I could live in one of these trailers, which weren't super nice, but I could have a little bit of yard. I'd have a little bit of freedom of growing space versus, you know, if I was in an apartment or if I was in a basement suite. So of course, I had to go for the trailer, and there was a bunch of fun years having a little garden there. These trailers had been kind of a retirement community that was transitioning into being developed. So they were older places that had been very loved until, you know, the older people who lived there kind of carried on to their next home. And the one that I was living in had these like 25-year-old rose bushes that, you know, I was always struggling to try to get them to survive. And every once in a while I'd get some beautiful flowers, but I had, you know, this garden filled with zucchinis and tomatoes, so many of my favorite things that, you know, I could get to finally grow again for myself. And, you know, once you have that space in your actual home, going from, you know, the community garden and how much work and effort it was to travel there to the convenience of just popping into your garden, going and picking some herbs for your meal, being able to enjoy the space when you get home from work. Because I was working at the shoe store, I was able to transition my shoe store work from Victoria to Kelowna when I moved back here. You know, it taught me a lot of gratitude for having your own at-home growing space. And, you know, after having that, it's hard to go back. From that trailer, me and my ex-partner bought a home. And it was in an area that I'd been eyeballing for a while. I loved the location. It was close to downtown. It was close to a park that was really beautiful. But most of all, I loved that it had some extra large sized lots. In this whole general area, the lots tended to be a little smaller, more of like a, you know, like 0.09 of an acre lots, and the lots on Walrod were kind of double the size. So they had these really big backyards, and they had front yards, and they had so much space for gardening. And so I always kind of kept my eye on this one street, and we ended up being able to find a place that was, you know, perfect for us, that we finally bought into. And one of the first things that we did when we got there was we ripped out a huge amount of the yard. The backyard was just the most perfect lawn you've ever seen. Not a single weed. The person had like babied this grass so much before we bought it. And when we came in, we just went and we ripped out about 1,000 square feet for the first garden. And from there, you know, the garden just kept getting bigger and bigger. In the end, we had about 2,000 square feet of garden, just pure vegetable garden. I got really into permaculture and perennial vegetables and concepts like food forests. So I started to fill in the space with fruit trees. We had espalier pears and apples. We had apricots. I had a huge collection of perennial vegetables that were suited to our to our cold climate. There's not very many of them, but I got them all. There was grapes, there was berries, there's so much food that was coming out of that space. We had a small greenhouse that we put in that grew some of like the most incredible eggplants. We had these amazing tomatoes, and you know, it was just a really, really incredible space. It was so amazing to me how much food I was able to get out of it. And also my goal, because I was working full time, you know, we're talking about having children. You know, we wanted to have freedom to, you know, socialize and see friends. So my goal in that space was for it to be highly efficient. I only wanted to spend an hour a day in the garden, which, I mean, like, sounds like a lot for some people. I gladly will give 3 hours a day to a garden. I love gardening. It's where I want to be, but I didn't want to feel forced into that space. And so, yeah, it's, you know, so many fond memories of that garden. At the time, I didn't really have anyone in my life to share like my passion for gardening. I was doing some really unique things. The name of this channel comes from that period of time, you can't eat the grass because we ripped out the front lawn, and we were in a very busy walking area. The sidewalk beside our house had tons of people walking their dogs, very friendly, and everyone would see us ripping the grass out in the front yard and stop and be like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that?" And we'd be like, "Well, can't eat the grass." And, you know, so the whole front yard was kind of being converted into this like food forest permaculture space, and it was very like public facing. But, you know, there's only so much engagement you can get from, you know, the random people walking by with their dogs. Only so many people want to talk about gardening. And I realized that I was like really missing that in my life, having people that I could share my passion with. And that's where this entire social media journey began for me. At the time, I had 2 children. They're quite young, so I was quite stuck and quite isolated to the house. I wasn't getting to socialize, and I was really struggling because of it. And so I started an Instagram account just to share my garden. And so many people that I'd kind of met in person had told me that my garden was like, it's too messy, it's too untraditional. They didn't really care about the perennial vegetables that I was so passionate about. I wasn't doing what other people wanted to do. So when I got on to the online communities and was sharing what I had and found other people who were really excited about what I was doing and other people who were doing similar things as well, it was really validating. It's one of the things that I appreciate so much about being able to make these videos and to, you know, have the conversations that I have, and the networking that I've done with people through the last, I don't know, it's coming up to 7 years now that I've been doing the social media, is, you know, just, it's so hard to find your people when you're in these small spaces. You know, so many of us are in small communities, and it feels like what we're doing is very strange and very unique, and there's no one who understands. But once you get kind of into this global space of online, you know, you can find your people so easily, and you can have these conversations and share these passions that, you know, kind of felt very isolating when in fact they're great for connecting. So, you know, being able to see how my love of gardening was able to connect me with other people has just been so incredible. If you go back and look at some of the oldest videos on this channel, they will be at that original garden. I made content on here for about a year before we eventually decided to buy a farm and move to the farm. And, you know, at that point, I'd been personally gardening for 15 years. and I am a little bit of like a research nut. I love learning things. And I'd been really passionate about farming as something to discover and to research. So the moving on to a space where I could do these bigger things, have these bigger dreams, was really, really exciting. And, you know, I think that kind of how much work that got done over the 6 years that I was on the farm kind of like speaks for itself about, you know, when you take this passion and you just give it space to expand into, there's a huge amount of things that you can achieve. It feels really strange to be standing here, 41, and, you know, when people ask me, what do you do? What is it that your life is about? You know, before when I had the farm, it was easy to say, well, I'm a farmer. That was a little bit more clear. But now to be saying, like, when people ask, what do you do for work? It's like, well, I make educational videos about gardening. It's very strange to wonder like how I got to this space, but you know, it's like the growing, the passion for the growing, the passion for food has kind of always guided me here. It's so strange for me to think that I worked at a shoe store for, over a decade. Not because I care about shoes, but because, I wanted to build a life that made space for me to be able to grow. And I'm really excited about moving forward in my life too, because the one thing that I've learned with every move and every kind of change to my gardening focus is that, it's, if you make space for those things that you love and you're passionate about, build it and they will come kind of concept, right? If you just give yourself the permission to invest yourself into gardens, it's always gonna return that energy back to you. Like every garden that gets built is an act of love. But the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize when they're not gardeners is like you get that love back, right? You get to sit in that space and there's just so much peace and so much satisfaction that comes from being in those spaces that you build yourself. And so I'm really excited. I'm really excited for the year coming to be able to do that again, but more importantly than just doing it in theory, but to do it with the focus back on food. I have some really exciting content plans for this upcoming year. I've already shared that I'm going to be creating a space that is for growing cut flowers. And more than that, I'm going to be creating a video series that are about growing cut flowers. I know one of the things that is so challenging with any of that type of growing is understanding successions and workflow and all of that. And so having 20 years of gardening experience, the 6 years of farming experience where, having those timing and successions lined up well is so important. I'm really excited to be able to share that with you all on a home gardening scale. I think sometimes with the farm, the focus of the actual skills that could be used for anyone kind of got lost in just the quantities of what I was doing. So I'm really excited to share the year of flowers, but beyond that, I also really want a year of food. And so, the growing that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be taking, because the reality is I grew food for sale for 3 years. I grew food for sale with needing to be focused on successions, having as many weeks as long as possible for the selling season. I did that for as many years for veggies as I did for flowers. And, I really want to be returning back to that. The not having those fresh veggies straight from the garden over the last few years has really affected, my diet. It's really affected kind of, my quality of life in some ways. And I'm really excited to have that back in the garden, have that back in my life, and to share it with you too. There's so many good early spring veggies. Here in the Okanagan, this is a zone 5. I'm Canadian, right? Like this is a colder zone for growing, but despite that, there's a lot of food that you can get, as early as April, definitely by May, there's lots of food coming out of the garden. And there's also lots of tricks for being able to extend that up until even December. So I'm really excited to be sharing with you guys everything that I'm going to be growing, and also maybe some recipes, some ideas on how to use some of these vegetables that, you don't necessarily see in the grocery store, which is, a huge amount of fun of growing veggies in your garden, being able to have things that you can't access anywhere else. So I hope that you guys will stick around and look forward to the content upcoming. Coming up, I'm going to be having stuff about the seeds that I'm going to be growing, and then come March is when growing starts for real, for serious. So I'm really excited for the year, and I'm hopeful that you guys will be excited to join me too. Gardens need to have a plan in order to succeed, and businesses need to have a plan in order to succeed too. And one really important thing in any business's plan should be having a website. And if you struggle with that, Squarespace can help you. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place, all on your terms. I love how easy they make it for me to build a website. But that's not all. Squarespace payments and invoicing helps me run my business in person too. Domains by Squarespace makes it the first as well as last stop in building my website, and they even have tools to help me sell content or courses, which is really valuable for a creator like me. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/youcan'teatthegrass to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.